Hey bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to talk to you about the most surprising and disappointing books that I read in 2018. I have 5 surprising books and 7 disappointing books to talk to you about today. And while some of these I did mention in my best and worst books videos, in general I consider surprising and disappointing to mean different things than best and worst. These are in no particular order, they're mostly in the order that I read them. I'm going to start with my surprising books and then move on to my disappointing books afterwards. The first surprise that I had in 2018 was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This one is one that I talked about in my best books of 2018. This is an adult sci-fi thriller, and I read it as part of my work book club. I had heard of this book before I picked it up, but I hadn't heard that much about it. I knew that it was science fiction, and so I think I assumed it was going to be a little on the dry side, which it wasn't at all. I wasn't expecting there to be so much character depth. The main character and his relationships with all of the people in his lives is one of my favorite things about this book. And on top of that, the ending was really thought-provoking, which was also really unexpected. My next surprise was Reign the Earth by A.C. Gauguin, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars, and I did receive a free e-ARC or advanced reader copy of this in exchange for an honest review. This is a YA high fantasy, although I would say that it leans more new adult or on the older end of YA because of the heavy topics that it discusses, and that's what I loved about it and what surprised me about this book. I think I was expecting a YA high fantasy with a lot of adventure and magic, and while there is magic in this book, it's also about a girl who agrees to a political marriage for the sake of saving her country, and the guy that she marries is not a great guy, and so it also ends up dealing with the topic of domestic violence and the things that you will do to protect your family and the people you love. I really think this book is a hidden gem and not enough people are talking about it. My next surprise was The Sea of Tranquility by Katja Millay, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This one is another one that I talked about in my best books of 2018. This is a YA contemporary romance, and I don't typically read contemporary at all, and when I do, I don't usually read contemporary romance because if romance plays a really big part in a contemporary story, typically I lose interest. That was definitely not the case here, and much to my surprise, I was really sucked into this romance. The book does deal with some heavier topics because both of the main characters are dealing with some trauma in their past, and I think that helped to hold my attention. This book also just got me in the feels and made me emotional, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought it was going to. My next surprise was The Book of M by Pink Shepherd, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars, and I did receive a free e-ARC or advanced reader copy of this in exchange for an honest review. This is an adult post-apocalyptic fiction. It's set in a world where one day people's shadows start to disappear, and when their shadows start to disappear, they also start to lose their memories. I found this concept to be fascinating, but what I wasn't expecting was that the book was going to be so thought-provoking. I found I really enjoy books that play around with the theme or idea of memory, and the way that it's explored in this book really took me by surprise. Now, when I say post-apocalyptic fiction, that probably makes it sound like this is action-packed and sort of thrillery, but that's not what it is at all. So if you're going to read this book, definitely go into it with some different expectations. This book has a very literary feel to it, and in that sense, it reminds me a lot of Station 11, which I also read in 2018, and we'll be talking about later in this video, but I think I actually liked The Book of M more than Station 11. My last surprising book of 2018 was Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. And this one also made it into my best books of 2018. I honestly hadn't heard anything about this book. It was a random recommendation to me, actually from Sean from Eclectic Reads. I was in the mood for horror and I asked for some recommendations on Twitter, and I absolutely loved this book. This doesn't happen to me very often anymore because I'm so immersed in the book community and I'm constantly hearing about books that I want to read. But when I stumble across a book that I have never heard of, have no expectations of, and I end up loving it, that is such an amazing feeling. This is an adult horror book. It's about 5 horror authors that are invited to spend the night or the weekend in a haunted house. It's about what happens to them that night and some of the things that happen to them after that night. This was just such a fun horror book to read, and because I had no expectations going in, it absolutely blew me away. I was surprised to find that Scott Thomas was a debut author, and so I am eagerly anticipating anything else that he comes out with. Alright, let's move on to my disappointing books. Not all of these books have low ratings, but that's because even though I enjoyed the books, I had higher expectations of them for various reasons. The first book that disappointed me was The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, which I gave 3 out of 5 stars. I had high hopes going into this book because I know so many people who really love this series. And while I liked some things about the book, I also didn't like some things about the book. The first 2 books in the Witcher series are made up of short stories, and I think that was part of the reason why I didn't enjoy it as much as I had hoped. I think the short story compilation format just made it harder for me to connect with the characters. And on top of that, these books tend to be a little dialogue heavy. I read the second one on an audiobook, and that made the writing style a little easier to digest, I think. But the first one I read on ebook. One of the things that I really loved about the book, though, was that a lot of these short stories are dark and twisted retellings of fairy tales. And I love seeing dark and twisty retellings of fairy tales. I do want to continue the series because starting with the 3rd book is when we get a more traditional story format. So I'm hoping to enjoy the series more the further I get in. My next disappointing book was Unbury Carol by Josh Malerman, which I gave 2 out of 5 stars. And this was an e-arc that I received in exchange for an honest review. This is also a book that I talked about in my worst books of 2018, so if you want more of my thoughts on it, I go into a little more depth in that video. My expectations were just totally off going into this book. I thought this was going to be a thriller or a horror, and while this book did have some horror elements to it, it was definitely not a horror book. This is more of an adult western with some magical realism or surrealism aspects to it. And while the premise of a woman who goes into these deep comas was really interesting to me, I did not enjoy this book. I was very bored, and I didn't like the surrealism aspect to it at all. But mostly it just wasn't at all what I was expecting. If I had known what this book was before I picked it up, I wouldn't have picked it up. My next disappointing read was also one of my worst books of 2018, and that is 7 Eves by Neal Stephenson. I read this book as part of my work book club, and I was expecting a lot from this book because Neal Stephenson is a famous author who has other books that have won awards and things. So this is an adult science fiction, and not only was this super long, the science in it, while being pretty realistic and obviously well researched, was so dry. There were just pages and pages of him explaining how things worked. And on top of that, there were a ton of characters, and they were all flat and two-dimensional. I really did not like this book, and I had such high expectations going into it, so I was so disappointed. My next disappointing read was Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter. This was an e-arc or advanced reader copy that I received in exchange for an honest review, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. So this is one of those where I gave a decent rating because I did enjoy it, but I just had higher expectations going in. And that's because I've heard such amazing things about Karen Slaughter. She's a thriller writer who is sometimes compared to Gillian Flynn. I'd heard that her books were really dark, and I didn't find this book to be dark at all. There were a lot of things that I liked about this book. I liked the mystery that we unraveled. I liked the way that it explored motherhood and mother-daughter relationships, but I was just expecting it to be amazing, and for me, it wasn't that. My next disappointing read was Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab. This is the second book in the Monsters of Verity duology, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. So I did enjoy this book, but it didn't live up to the expectations that I had based on how much I enjoyed the first book. The first book, which is called This Savage Song, I think I gave 4 stars when I read it in 2017. This is a YA urban fantasy that's sort of dystopian because it's set in a future United States. I really love the world building and concepts in this series, but I didn't really love the direction that the characters went in the second book. One of the main characters, August, I absolutely love and adore, but I actually don't like the other main character, Kate. which is sort of an unpopular opinion. I think a lot of people like her, but I kind of find her to be selfish and she just rubs me the wrong way. And I really wanted to love this book, but I ended up thinking it was just okay. The next disappointing read that I had was The Final Descent by Rick Yancey, which is the fourth and final book in the Monstromologist series. And I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Again, this was a book that I enjoyed for the most part, but it did not live up to my expectations that I had based on the prior books in the series. I think I gave all 3 of the prior books 4 out of 5 stars. This is a YA urban fantasy, but in a historical setting, because it's set in like the 1800s. The first book in the series starts out as middle grade, and then they kind of age upwards until you get to this one, which is definitely YA. I found this finale to be a lot more confusing than the previous books. The main character, Will, who I have absolutely adored, seemed like a completely different person to me in this last book. Will is an apprentice to a monstromologist, which is like a PhD sort of doctor who studies monsters in this world. This was not the finale that I had been hoping for, and I was very disappointed with this ending to the series. I still think the series is worth the read, but I would go into this last one knowing that it's very different than the previous 3 books. And now we are on to my very last disappointing read of 2018, and this one might be a surprise to some people, but it is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I still gave this book 4 stars, although it's more of like a 3.5 that rounded up to 4. I was just expecting so much more from this book than what I got. This is an adult post-apocalyptic book, but kind of like I mentioned for the Book of M, it's a very quiet, almost literary fiction type of book. So not your typical post-apocalyptic fiction. And I definitely knew that before going in, so that wasn't part of my disappointment. I really loved most of this book while I was reading it. I thought it was going to be a 5-star book because of the way that it was setting itself up. And I felt like we were leading up to some epic ending, something that was going to be really meaningful or impactful, and the ending just kind of fell apart for me. And on top of that, there are a ton of unanswered questions at the end of this book that I thought we were getting answers to, and I was really disappointed when I finished it. Not only did the book set me up for an ending that I didn't get, I've seen this book on a ton of people's best of lists throughout the last couple of years, so I was really expecting something epic, and it just did not pan out. I know that's a little bit of an unpopular opinion because this book is a favorite to so many people, and I just want to put out there that if you enjoyed this book, I hope that you give the Book of M a chance, because I see so many similarities between these books, but I like the Book of M even better. Alright guys, those are all of my surprising and disappointing books that I read in 2018. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them down in the comment section. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like bookish content. I post 1 to 2 times a week. That is all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye. Expecting was the book to be, and it's about book to read. I liked my next post, and yeah, I wanted, and yeah, I just, this book in the, bye.